From the very moment Bill began to feel that his body no longer belonged to him, this tragedy stopped being a mere sudden death inside a rotten marriage. It became the opening tremor of an earthquake capable of tearing apart every glittering facade, sweeping away false vows, and exposing a woman who had lived far too long through manipulation, through the terror of being unmasked, and through a survival instinct so warped it had turned merciless. Bill did not die simply because he had begun to suspect Hayley. Bill died because, in his final moments, he had started to connect the pieces. He realized that the lingering exhaustion, the dull recurring pain, the sudden collapses in his health were not random at all. He understood that Hayley's gentleness over the past several months had never truly been care, but control, not love, but a cold ritual designed to slip poison into his body little by little. Slow enough not to attract attention, steady enough to wear him down, subtle enough that every symptom could be dismissed as stress, age, or the consequences of a life full of enemies. The most terrifying part was that Bill did not die in total ignorance. He died at the exact moment the truth had just begun to flare inside his mind, at the exact moment he understood that the woman lying beside him had not only lied about her feelings and her loyalty, but might have been killing him day by day. Everything shifted after that final conversation with Chelsea. It was Chelsea, in the middle of her emotional turmoil, torn between fear for her father and the unbearable sense that something horrifying was unfolding, who accidentally revealed the very details she should have kept buried a little longer. She told Bill about Hayley's strange behavior, about the excessive panic whenever anyone mentioned financial records, about the way Hayley had once deflected when Chelsea casually brought up an unfamiliar name tied to her past, and most importantly, about the very real feeling Chelsea had when she looked at Hayley and no longer saw a wife trying to hold a marriage together, but someone standing guard over a secret on the verge of exploding. Chelsea had no idea that those few words would push Bill closer to death than ever before. But for a man like Bill, already full of suspicion, what Chelsea said was not merely a warning. It was the final catalyst. It made the scattered fragments snap together with horrifying speed. Bill remembered the glasses of water Hayley always insisted on bringing him, the meal she stubbornly wanted to prepare herself, the strangely tender way she behaved after each of his physical crashes, as if she were both the cause and the satisfied witness. He began to understand that his illness might not be an illness at all. It might be a sentence administered one drop at a time by the very wife he once believed he could control. Chelsea would be haunted by that memory forever, because she was the last person to see her father alive while his mind was already spiraling into near panic. After hearing her out, Bill did not react with the kind of anger Chelsea knew so well. That was what frightened her most. He went silent for too long, his eyes darkening as if some horrifying door had just opened in his mind. He asked a few short questions, no longer to reassure his daughter, but to confirm his own fear. Chelsea realized her father was thinking about something deeply dangerous, but she was not fast enough to stop what came next. She left with a sense of dread, never knowing that immediately afterward Bill would go straight to Hayley with a cold fury far more terrifying than shouting. It was in that confrontation that the balance of power in their marriage shifted completely. For the first time, Bill was no longer the man who believed he held every card. For the first time, Hayley saw in his eyes the certainty of someone who knew too much. Bill may not yet have had complete proof, may not have had time to call a lawyer, lock down the insurance records, or change his will, but Hayley understood one thing with brutal clarity. If Bill survived that night, she would lose everything. Hayley did not kill Bill out of desperation alone. Desperation may have been the spark, but the crime itself bore the shape of a plan that had been prepared long before. The insurance money was certainly a major motive, but it was not the only one. Hayley feared losing her position, feared losing the flawless mask she had built through practiced softness, but deeper than that, she feared Bill would uncover what she had done before. Because Bill may not have been the first man to enter Hayley's life only to wither in strange and troubling ways. In the darkness of her past, Hayley carried traces of brief relationships, men she had approached, charmed, drained of both emotion and wealth, and then left behind under murky circumstances. Maybe they had not all died, but some had gone bankrupt, some had emotionally collapsed. Some had left town in silence as though Hayley's presence itself were a kind of contamination that destroyed anyone who touched it. Bill, with his controlling nature and his habit of following the trail of other people's lives, was the first kind of man dangerous enough to see through that disguise. That was exactly what transformed him from a profitable target into a threat that had to be erased. The night Bill died was therefore no blind outburst. It was the moment Hayley chose to step across the final line. When Bill confronted her, he may not have named every crime outright, but he said enough to make Hayley understand the game was about to end. He may have mentioned the insurance records. He may have implied that her name would disappear from the will. He may have thrown at her his suspicions about the sudden declines in his condition and about the death-stained past he had always denied. For someone like Hayley, that was no longer an accusation. It was a death signal. She could not allow Bill to live long enough to make a phone call, meet a lawyer, order new tests, or worse, dig all the way back to the victims who came before him. So that death, even if disguised beneath the chaos of a medical crisis, was in truth the final act of silencing. The poison already inside Bill may have weakened him, but that night Hayley needed more than weakness. She needed permanent silence. What sends a chill through everyone is not only that Bill died, but the way Hayley remained calm afterward. That calmness was too clean, too controlled, too much like the reaction of someone who had rehearsed the scene in her mind long before it happened. While everyone else was stunned, Hayley displayed just enough pain, just enough anguish, just enough collapse to keep suspicion at bay. She knew exactly when to cry, when to go still, when to let her eyes turn hollow like a widow shattered by fate. But that precision in grief was precisely what planted doubt. Real sorrow does not move so neatly. It is messy, distorted, badly timed. But Hayley, even in mourning, seemed to be performing a role she had already memorized. She erased traces quickly, checked her phone, the insurance papers, the message history, everything that might connect her to the long campaign of poisoning. Yet no matter how carefully a crime is calculated, fear always leaves behind some mistake. Maybe it was a glass moved back into place too quickly, a dose missing from where it had been hidden, a timeline that did not match between Bill's sudden deterioration and Hayley's statement, or even an unsent message Bill had drafted but never had the chance to send. One detail, tiny as dust, but enough to bring the whole palace of lies crashing down if someone looked closely enough. The person most devastated by Bill's death was not Hayley, it was Chelsea. Chelsea's sobbing was not only the crying of a daughter who had lost her father. It was the scream of a mind tearing itself apart with the belief that she herself may have unintentionally accelerated the tragedy. If she had not told Bill those things, would he have lived a few more days, a few more weeks, long enough to investigate quietly and protect himself? If she had stayed silent, would Hayley not have felt cornered into striking that very night? That guilt would eat Chelsea alive from the inside, turning her tears into something far more dangerous to Hayley than any formal investigation. Because people consumed by guilt either collapse or become obsessed with the truth. And Chelsea carried enough pain to fall into the second path. She began replaying every detail of that final conversation with Bill, every shift in his expression, every moment when he seemed about to say something and then stopped himself. She remembered the cold feeling that ran down her spine when Bill did not lash out, but simply stared into empty space, as if death had already entered the room before Hayley ever made her final move. From that moment on, Chelsea understood that her father had not died in ignorance. He had died in the terror of a man who suddenly realized the enemy had been sleeping in his bed. That is exactly why Chelsea becomes the next threat. Not because she has clear evidence, but because she has instinct, memory, and an obsession that will not let her rest. She may be the first person who truly sees Hayley's real face, even if at first only through small cracks. She may also be hiding some details she has not yet dared to say aloud, perhaps that she once overheard a half-veiled threat from Hayley, or accidentally saw Bill trying to hide something before his collapse. Maybe Bill had managed to photograph documents, record a short audio clip, save a name in his phone, or leave behind a draft message mentioning the feeling that he was being poisoned. If so, Chelsea is not only carrying guilt, she is holding the fragment that could destroy Hayley. And that means her grief instantly becomes a battlefield. Every tear she sheds is no longer pure sorrow, but the beginning of a harsher resolve. If her father died because he knew the truth, then that truth must be dragged into the light, no matter the cost. Even if it means pulling the entire family into a new abyss. Donnie, meanwhile, will sense the coming storm by instinct even before any evidence surfaces. The relationship between Donnie and Bill has long been filled with anger, resentment, wounded pride, and a history of pain that could never be washed away. But hatred does not erase the ability to read one another after so many years. Donnie may realize that in his final days, Bill had been trying to warn someone without ever saying it openly. Maybe he had been acting differently, more restless, or trying to access some file connected to Hayley. When Bill dies, Donnie will not grieve gently, she will grieve through rage. Rage that the man who had caused her so much suffering died at the hands of someone like Hayley. Rage that Bill may have understood everything too late. Rage that Chelsea has been pushed into a pit of unbearable guilt. And above all, rage because she senses that this death is not clean. That fury could turn Donnie into Chelsea's unwilling ally. One woman carrying guilt, the other carrying fury, both seemingly different and yet pulled toward the same goal, stripping away the polished falsehood Hayley is clinging to in order to survive. From here, Bill's tragedy does not end with a funeral. It becomes the beginning of a far crueler war. His death will pull Hayley's past to the surface layer by layer, like drowned bodies rising from the water. The men who passed through her life will slowly take shape as haunting shadows. Old coincidences will be re-examined, insurance records, transfer histories, medical files, and the details once overlooked will begin linking together into something monstrous. At that point, the question will no longer be whether Hayley killed Bill, but whether Bill was only the latest victim in a pattern of manipulation stretching back years. If that is true, then Hayley is not simply a greedy wife who suddenly turned criminal. She is an emotional predator, a woman who uses fragility to get close, gentleness to sedate, and fear of exposure to destroy anyone who comes too near the truth. And what makes the whole story even more brutal is the painful irony at its center. Bill may have died because he finally chose to see the truth. And Chelsea may become the most tormented survivor precisely because she was the one who accidentally helped give that truth a name. She did not create the monster called Hayley. But she may have been the first to shine a light that terrified the monster so deeply it lashed out and tore everything apart in order to escape. From being a shattered daughter drowning in regret, Chelsea could transform into something else entirely, something more dangerous, colder, more relentless. If guilt does not destroy her, it will turn her into someone with nothing left to lose. And that is what Hayley should fear most. Insurance money may save Hayley for a while. Her performance of grief may fool the world for a while. But Chelsea's emotions, once they harden into the will to expose her, will become impossible to control. When a daughter is hurting so badly that peace no longer matters to her, she can dig through hell itself to find the answer. That is why this tragedy does not end with the question of whether Bill knew the truth before he died. The real question is who will be strong enough to survive once that truth begins to spread. Hayley killed Bill to silence a man who was fitting the final piece into place, but she failed to understand that his death would not bury the secret. It would only plant that secret in hearts already splitting apart with pain. In Chelsea's frenzied guilt, in Donnie's unyielding anger, in the small traces Bill may have left behind before he fell, another verdict is already taking shape in silence. Hayley may have won the battle that night, But if Bill truly saw her real face before he died, then that victory was only the overture to Hayley's own downfall.